90-year-old Apache fights 100 wolves to save her last calf in degrees C. The temperature had fallen to -25 degrees, a kind of cold that did not forgive mistakes. In the middle of this frozen world lived a woman who had seen 90 winters. She was Apache, born on this land, raised by it, and shaped by its hardships and beauty. Her body was old, slow, and often painful, but her eyes were still sharp. They carried stories of a long life, stories of loss, survival, and deep connection to the earth. She lived in a small wooden shelter built by her late husband many years ago. The walls were rough, the roof low, but it stood strong against the wind. Smoke rose gently from a small fire inside, the only warmth fighting the endless cold outside. Every morning before the sun fully showed itself, she woke up. Her joints protested as she stood, but she ignored the pain. Pain had been her companion for many years now. She wrapped herself in thick, worn clothing and stepped outside, her boots crunching loudly in the snow. The land was quiet, almost too quiet. No birds sang. No trees moved unless the wind forced them. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Not far from her shelter was a small pen made of wood and wire. Inside it stood her calf. The animal was young, with soft eyes and shaky legs that were still learning strength. This calf was the last one she owned. Long ago she had a small herd, enough to trade, to survive, and to feel secure. But time had taken them one by one. Illness, harsh winters, and age had slowly reduced everything she once had. Now only this calf remained. To her, the calf was more than an animal. It was her responsibility, her companion, and her final promise to herself. It represented life continuing, even when everything else seemed to fade away. She spoke to it softly every day in a low, calm voice. The calf did not understand the words, but it understood her presence. It trusted her, and that trust weighed heavily on her heart. As she checked the pen, she noticed something unusual. The snow near the edges looked disturbed. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but she had lived too long on this land to be fooled easily. She bent down slowly and brushed away the thin layer of snow. Marks appeared underneath, deep, uneven shapes pressed into the frozen ground. Her face tightened, but she did not panic. She straightened herself and looked around carefully. The forest beyond her land stood dark and thick, the trees packed closely together like silent watchers. For a moment, she felt the old feeling return, the sense that she was not alone. She had felt it many times before in her life, usually when change was coming. She returned to her shelter and sat near the fire. The flames danced softly, reflecting in her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly, not just from the cold, but from memory. She remembered her grandmother telling stories by the fire when she was a child. Stories about respect for nature, about listening more than speaking, and about courage that did not come from anger but from calm strength. Those teachings had stayed with her. They guided her when she lost her husband. They guided her when her children moved far away to lives of their own. And now, they guided her again as the land seemed to whisper a warning. That afternoon, the sky turned gray, heavy with more snow. The wind grew stronger, pushing against her shelter as if testing it. She added more wood to the fire and prepared what little food she had. Supplies were low. Winter always made things difficult, but this year was worse. Her body was weaker, and every task took longer than it used to. Before night fell, she stepped outside once more to check on the calf. The animal shifted nervously when it saw her, sensing her unease. She placed her hand gently on its back, feeling its warmth through the thick hide. "I am here," she whispered, more to herself than to the calf. "You are not alone." Low, long calls carried by the wind. She froze, listening carefully. The sound faded, then returned, farther away this time. Her heart beat slower, steadier. Fear would not help her now. She had learned that long ago. She went back inside and closed the door firmly. Sitting near the fire, she planned quietly. She checked her tools, simple things she had used her whole life. Nothing fancy, nothing new, just what she knew and trusted. She reminded herself that the land had raised her. It had tested her many times before, and she had endured. Outside, the night grew colder. The moon rose, pale and distant, casting weak light over the snow. Shadows stretched across the ground, moving slowly as the trees swayed. The quiet returned, but it was different now. It felt heavy, watching, waiting. Inside her shelter, the old Apache woman sat still, listening to every sound. Her breathing was calm. Her mind was clear. She knew that something was coming. She did not know when, and she did not know how difficult it would be. But she knew one thing with certainty. She would not abandon the last living piece of her world. As the fire crackled softly beside her, she lifted her eyes and stared at the door. Outside, the frozen land waited. And so did she. Morning came slowly, as if the sun itself was tired of fighting the cold. Pale light spread across the snow, turning everything soft and quiet. The old woman woke before the light fully reached her shelter. She had not slept much. Her body rested, but her mind stayed alert, listening to every sound the night brought. When she finally stood up, her legs felt heavy, but her balance was steady. She took a deep breath and prepared for the day. When she opened the door, cold air rushed in, sharp and unforgiving. She stepped outside carefully. The snow had fallen again during the night, fresh and smooth, but she knew better than to trust its clean surface. Snow could hide many truths. Her eyes moved slowly over the ground, reading it like a story written without words. Near the calf's pen, she saw them clearly now. Many marks, too many to count. They went in circles, some close, some farther away, as if something had been watching and waiting. Her chest tightened, but her face remained calm. Panic had no place here. She had learned long ago that fear only made the mind weak. The calf stood quietly, steam rising from its breath. It was alive, unharmed, but restless. It sensed danger even if it could not understand it. The woman moved closer and checked the fence, pressing on the wood and wire with her hands. It held, but just barely. Winter had made the wood dry and weak in places. She spoke softly to the calf, her voice low and steady. The sound seemed to calm both of them. She stayed there for a while, standing still, letting the cold sink into her bones. She wanted to feel the land, to understand what it was telling her. The forest beyond her land looked different now. It was not just trees and shadows anymore. It felt awake. She could feel eyes on her, even though she could not see them. Hunger had grown strong in the wild this winter. Food was harder to find, and cold pushed everything closer together. She understood this. She did not blame the creatures that searched for survival. Nature followed its own rules. She returned to her shelter and began to prepare. She did not rush. Every movement was slow but careful. She gathered dry wood, old cloth, and tools she had kept for many years. Each item had a purpose. Each one carried memory. Her hands knew what to do even when her body felt tired. As she worked, memories rose quietly in her mind. She remembered being a young girl, walking beside her father across wide land before roads and fences changed everything. He had taught her how to read the ground, how to understand weather, and how to stay calm when things went wrong. "The land speaks," he used to say. "You just have to listen." A large group moving together, patient and careful. She felt a deep sadness, not for herself, but for how the world had become. Once, the land had more space, more balance. Now everyone was pushed closer, forced to fight the cold in smaller and smaller places. Still, she knew sadness would not protect the calf. She made small changes around the pen, strengthening weak spots as best she could. Her fingers ached and the cold burned her skin, but she kept going. Each small effort mattered. She worked not with strength but with focus. As afternoon faded, the sky darkened again. Heavy clouds rolled in, blocking what little warmth the sun could offer. The world felt smaller, tighter. Sound traveled strangely in the cold, and every distant noise made her pause and listen. Then she heard it again, a long call carried by the wind. This time it was closer, not loud but clear. It was answered by another farther away. Her heart beat steadily, not fast. She had expected this. She returned inside and sat near the fire, warming her hands. She closed her eyes and breathed slowly. In her mind, she spoke to her ancestors, not with words but with feeling. She asked for clarity, not protection. She knew this moment would test her, but she also knew she was not alone in spirit. As night came, she ate a small meal and drank warm water. She saved what she could. Winter nights were long and energy was precious. She wrapped herself in layers and kept the fire alive, feeding it carefully so it would last. Outside, shadows moved along the edge of the forest. Sometimes they stopped. Sometimes they circled. She could feel their presence even without seeing them clearly. The cold seemed deeper now, pressing down like weight. She stood up slowly and picked up one of her tools. It felt familiar in her hand. Not a weapon, but something she had used many times before to guide and protect. She stepped outside again, standing between her shelter and the calf's pen. The wind cut through her clothing and her breath turned white instantly. Her legs trembled slightly, but she planted her feet firmly in the snow. She did not shout. She did not move suddenly. She simply stood, tall and steady, showing she was aware, alert, and unafraid. The shapes at the edge of the trees paused. The land grew quiet again. Even the wind seemed to slow. Time stretched, each moment heavy with meaning. She knew this was only the beginning. The night would test her patience, her endurance, and her will. But as she stood there under the dark sky, surrounded by snow and silence, one truth burned strong inside her. She had lived a long life. She had faced loss, hunger, and hardship before. And as long as she could still stand, she would not step aside. The land had raised her. Now once more she would stand with it. The night deepened and the cold grew sharper with every passing hour. The sky was dark and heavy, without stars, as thick clouds covered everything above. The old woman stood near the pen, wrapped in layers of worn clothing, her breath rising in slow white clouds. The snow beneath her feet felt hard and unforgiving, but she did not move away. She knew this night would demand patience more than strength. The land was not silent anymore. Soft sounds drifted through the air, light movements, slow steps, careful and measured. They stayed just beyond clear sight, blending with the shadows of the trees. She did not try to look directly at them. Instead, she watched the space between the forest and her land, trusting her senses more than her eyes. The calf shifted inside the pen, uneasy. It moved closer to her side, as if drawn by her calm presence. She reached out and placed her hand gently against the fence, letting the calf feel she was near. Her touch was steady, even though her fingers were numb from the cold. She whispered softly, not in fear but in reassurance. Time moved strangely that night. Minutes felt like hours, and hours stretched into something larger, heavier. Her legs began to ache and her back burned with pain, but she did not sit down. Sitting would make it harder to stand again, and she needed to stay ready. She remembered another night long ago when she was still young. A storm had trapped her family far from shelter, and fear had tried to take over then too. Her mother had held her hand and said, "Stay calm, the storm will pass, but fear can stay if you let it." That lesson had never left her. A shape moved closer, then stopped. Another followed, then another. They did not rush. They watched. They waited. Hunger and cold made everything cautious. The woman raised one of her tools slowly and made a steady sound against the frozen ground. Not loud, not sudden, just enough to say she was there and aware. The sound echoed faintly across the snow. The shapes paused again. The land felt tense like a stretched rope. The woman's heart beat slowly, evenly. She controlled her breathing, drawing warmth into her chest with every breath she took. She began to walk slowly along the edge of the pen, keeping herself between the calf and the darkness. Each step was careful. Snow crunched softly under her boots. The cold bit harder now, slipping through every layer of clothing, but she welcomed the pain. It kept her awake. It kept her focused. From time to time, she stopped and listened. The sound shifted, moved farther, then closer again. It was a test of patience for everyone involved. She understood that. She did not see this as a battle. It was a conversation without words, a meeting of needs and limits. Her arms grew tired from holding her tools. She rested them briefly against her sides, then lifted them again. She refused to let weakness show. Even in stillness, she stood tall, her posture firm, her presence strong. The firelight from her shelter flickered faintly in the distance, offering a small circle of warmth and safety. She resisted the urge to return to it. If she left now, even for a moment, the balance could change. She stayed where she was. The night pressed on. Frost gathered on her clothing, turning the edges white and stiff. Her eyelashes felt heavy, weighed down by ice. Still, her mind remained clear. She spoke quietly to herself, reminding her body to keep moving, to stay awake, to endure. At one point, the wind shifted, carrying scents and sounds differently. The shape seemed closer then, more present. The calf let out a soft sound, full of fear. The woman answered immediately, her voice calm and steady, speaking words passed down through generations. Words meant to soothe, meant to connect, meant to remind life that it was not alone. She lifted one arm slowly and waved it gently, making herself appear larger without sudden motion. She took a step forward, then another, firm but controlled. The ground felt solid beneath her feet. She trusted it just as it trusted her. The shapes hesitated. The tension changed. She could feel it, like a shift in the air. This was not about force. It never was. It was about resolve. Hours passed this way. Her body screamed for rest. Her hands shook slightly now, not from fear but from cold and age. She allowed herself short moments of stillness, leaning lightly against the fence, never letting her guard down completely. She thought of her children, grown and far away, living lives that no longer matched the land. She hoped they were warm, safe, and unaware of this long night. She did not feel anger toward them. Everyone walked their own path. The sky began to lighten just slightly, though dawn was still far away. The darkness thinned, and with it, the heavy feeling began to ease. The shapes shifted again, this time pulling back, not disappearing but creating space. The woman stayed alert. She knew better than to relax too soon. She held her ground, her presence unchanged, her focus unbroken. She had learned that endurance often mattered more at the end than at the beginning. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the movement slowed. The sounds faded into the distance. The forest reclaimed its quiet, though it was not the same silence as before. It was calmer now, settled. She did not move right away. She waited, counting her breaths, listening carefully. Only when she was certain did she lower her arms and step closer to the pen. The calf stood there, cold but unharmed, its eyes wide but alive. A deep breath escaped her lips, carrying relief she had not allowed herself to feel until now. She placed her hand against the fence again, steadying herself. Her knees trembled, and she allowed herself to sit slowly on a low wooden block nearby. The night had taken much from her, strength, warmth, energy, but it had not taken her will. As the sky slowly prepared for morning, the old Apache woman sat quietly beside the calf, watching the frozen land around her. She knew the test was not fully over. Another night could come. Another challenge could rise. But for now, she had stood her ground. And that was enough. The cold did not leave with the fading night. Even as the sky slowly turned lighter, the air stayed sharp and heavy. The old woman remained seated near the pen for a long time after the sounds had faded. Her body felt stiff, as if it belonged to the frozen land itself. Every breath hurt a little, but she welcomed the pain. It reminded her that she was still here. When the light finally grew strong enough to see clearly, she pushed herself up slowly. Her legs shook and she paused, waiting for strength to return. The calf lifted its head and watched her closely. Seeing it standing there, alive and calm, filled her with quiet relief. She reached out and touched its neck gently. The warmth under her hand felt like a small miracle. She checked the ground carefully. The marks were still there, but they pointed away now, leading back toward the forest. She followed them with her eyes until they disappeared among the trees. She did not feel victory or pride, only understanding. The night had ended because balance had been reached, at least for now. She moved back to her shelter slowly, every step measured. Inside, the fire had burned low, but a few glowing pieces remained. She added wood and sat close, letting the warmth return to her hands and face. Her fingers tingled as feeling came back, and she closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. Sleep came in short pieces. Her mind stayed half awake, listening even as her body rested. When she finally rose again, the sun was higher, though its warmth did little against the cold. She drank warm water and ate a small portion of food. Energy was important now. She knew another night could come, just as difficult as the last. Later, she stepped outside again to strengthen what she could. The fence had held, but just barely. She tied loose wire, pressed broken wood back into place, and packed snow tightly around weak spots to harden them. Her movements were slow but steady. Each small task mattered. The land around her felt changed. Not calmer, but aware. She could feel it watching, learning just as she was. She respected that feeling. She had always believed that the land remembered those who treated it with care. As the day passed, clouds gathered again. The wind picked up, carrying the promise of another hard night. She paused often to rest, leaning on her tools, catching her breath. Her body reminded her of its limits, but her mind stayed strong. She spoke softly to the calf as she worked, telling it stories from long ago. Stories of open land, of people who moved with the seasons, of times when survival depended on listening more than fighting. The calf listened quietly, comforted by the sound of her voice. As evening approached, she prepared once more. She made sure the fire was ready, her tools close, and her path to the pen clear. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. She accepted what was coming with calm resolve. When darkness fell again, she took her place near the pen. The cold felt deeper than before, settling into her bones. She shifted her weight often to keep her blood moving. Her breath rose in steady clouds, each one proof of her control. The sounds returned, faint at first, then clearer. Movement along the tree line, shapes slipping between shadows. She felt the familiar tension return, but this time it was different. The fear was weaker. Experience had replaced it. She stood tall, her presence firm and clear. She used sound again, steady and controlled, not loud, not sudden. She let the land know she was aware. She let the watchers know she would not move aside. Hours passed. The cold pressed harder. Her hands grew stiff and her shoulders burned with pain. She leaned briefly against the fence, then straightened again. Giving up was not an option. She had already decided that. At one moment, the shapes moved closer than before. The calf shifted, nervous again. The woman stepped forward without hesitation, placing herself fully between danger and what she protected. Her voice rose, calm but strong, carrying confidence rather than threat. She remembered every lesson she had ever learned about patience, about standing firm without anger, about knowing when to push and when to simply exist without retreat. The shapes paused. The air felt tight, stretched thin. She held her ground, breathing slowly, refusing to let exhaustion show. Her body screamed for rest, but her spirit answered louder. Slowly, the pressure eased. The movement pulled back again, hesitant, uncertain. She did not chase them away. She simply remained where she was, steady and unchanging. By the time the sky began to lighten once more, the cold had taken nearly everything her body could give. Her legs trembled openly now, and her hands shook. But the land was quiet again. The forest stood still. She waited, listening, counting breaths. Only when she was certain did she allow herself to lower her arms. She turned toward the calf, who stood unharmed once more. She smiled faintly, a small, tired smile. It was not happiness. It was relief mixed with deep understanding. She knew this struggle was not about winning or losing. It was about holding on. As the sun rose weakly over the frozen land, she remained standing beside the pen, a small figure against the vast cold. Age had bent her body, but it had not broken her will. The land had tested her again, and once again she had answered. The morning came slowly, gentle and quiet, as if the land itself was tired. Pale sunlight touched the snow, turning it soft and bright. The long night had passed at last. The old woman stood near the pen, her body heavy with exhaustion, her breath slow and deep. Every part of her ached, but inside her chest was a calm she had not felt in a long time. She looked at the calf standing safely beside her. Its eyes were clear. Its body was still warm and steady. She reached out and rested her hand on its back, feeling life move beneath her palm. For a long moment she said nothing. Words felt too small for what she felt. The forest beyond her land stood silent. The marks in the snow led away now, fading into the trees. Nothing moved, nothing watched. The land had settled again. She understood this silence. It was not empty, it was respectful. She turned slowly and walked back to her shelter. Each step felt heavy, but she did not rush. Inside, she sat near the fire and let the warmth wrap around her. Her hands shook as she held a cup of warm water. She drank slowly, letting the heat travel through her body. Sleep came this time, deep and complete. When she woke again, the sun was higher in the sky. The cold was still strong, but the worst had passed. She stepped outside and breathed in the sharp air. It felt cleaner now, lighter. As the day moved forward, she did what she always did. She checked the fence. She fed the calf. She gathered what little she could. Life returned to its quiet rhythm. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. Just survival continuing one step at a time. Later that day, distant figures appeared on the edge of her land. A few people from a nearby community had come to check on her. They had seen the signs in the snow. They had felt the long, heavy nights too. When they reached her, they looked at her with surprise and respect. She did not tell them everything. She did not need to. They saw enough in her tired face and steady eyes. They helped her strengthen the pen and brought extra supplies. No one spoke loudly. The land did not ask for noise. As the sun dipped again toward the horizon, the old woman sat outside her shelter, wrapped in warm cloth, the calf nearby. She watched the sky change color slowly. Orange faded into soft gray. Night would come again, as it always did, but it no longer felt threatening. She thought about her long life, about the people she had loved and lost, about the land that had given her everything and taken much in return. She did not feel bitterness, only gratitude. Every hard moment had taught her something. Every loss had shaped her strength. She knew her time was limited. Her body reminded her every day. But she also knew that what truly mattered would remain. The stories, the lessons, the respect for life and land, those things did not age. That night she slept peacefully. No distant sounds pulled her awake. No shadows pressed close. The land rested with her. In the days that followed, winter slowly loosened its grip. Not quickly, not kindly, but enough. The calf grew stronger. The woman grew quieter, but her presence remained powerful. People spoke of her courage in low voices, not as a story of fear, but as a reminder of calm strength. She did not seek attention. She never had. She simply lived as she always had, grounded and aware. When spring finally began to show itself, she sat outside once more, feeling the weak warmth of the sun on her face. She closed her eyes and smiled. The land had tested her one final time. And she had answered not with force, but with wisdom, patience, and an unbroken spirit. Her story did not end with noise or praise. It ended the way she lived, quiet, strong, and deeply rooted in the earth. And the land remembered her.